Venter enda flere rentehevinger hvis krona blir svak. Så nå har jeg jo snakket om hvorfor norske kroner er svak. De har trykt så enormt med penger. Siden 2008 i Norge, det har jeg ikke snakket om engang. Det er helt påfallende at jeg hadde økonomer i Norge og journalistene. Jeg forstår ikke netter lenger. De holder så mye informasjon utenfor folk. Om det er med vilje eller uten vilje, det vet jeg snart ikke lenger. Om det er bare et dumskap. Hvis man får høyere rente, så får du en masse konkurs i Norge. Og husprisene dette. Skulle ikke Norge være et rikt land? Sterkere enn dagens nivå. Norske kroner har tatt med 90% på 12 år mot dollaren og 55% mot euroen. Så det er helt sånn helt utrolig det de klarer å lire seg. Jeg skal høre litt på han her karen. Så jeg hva han sier.
Right, have actually, I think, sorted themselves out. You know, they don't go out and do expensive investor presentations in foreign cities and all the rest of it so much. I mean, that game is definitely over. So I just feel there's, you know, they're more realistic, if you like, the management of these mines. So that's something which is worth bearing in mind. There is also the possibility of going into inflation-linked bonds, government bonds. I would certainly look at replacing fixed interest bonds with inflation-linked bonds. But I'm actually quite cynical about, you know, governments sticking to paying, you know, a proper inflation-adjusted rate. I mean, you know, it's not beyond them to fiddle with the figures. So I don't think that's if you like, a complete solution. But nonetheless, I think those two areas are probably, if you've got to remain in fiat, and let's face it, most of us do with any sort of capital, we think that way, then those are probably the two areas I would look at. Otherwise, my own personal view is just get the hell out of fiat currencies. Get out of credit. It is credit that is collapsing. Do you want to have credit? No, you don't want to have a part in credit. You want to get out of it. You want to hoard real money, which since Roman times has very definitely been gold, silver, and for very small denominations, copper. But principally, we're talking gold.
Now, mentioning precious metals, we're seeing quite a pop today in the price. This morning, we're seeing gold up well above $2,000 an ounce, silver quite a bit above $25. Your perspective on the recent bounce we've seen, and also really since the beginning of this banking crisis, we have seen a huge rally in both the metals.
Yeah, well, I mean, I think they've been somewhat left behind. It's interesting. I think, you know, the thing is obviously driven not by demand so much for physical metals, though it's in very short supply, as I understand it. I mean, everybody I talk to, you know, trying to sell coins to the public, and you know, when you look at what central banks are doing, when you look at the deliveries that are coming out of COMEX, I mean, it's quite remarkable. This is not meant to be a delivery market, yet you know, tons disappear out of COMEX through deliveries every week. So, I mean, I think, you know, in the very short term, you have got bullion banks who are short. They always take the short side. It's very rarely they go long. Just occasionally they go long in silver because that's an illiquid market, and they somehow manage to do so, but they're not long of that anymore. When it comes to gold, however, with the gold contract, you know, they are short and they're now being squeezed. And here we have banks failing. So just imagine that you're a swap, and most of the swaps are bullion bank traders, trading desks. So you're running a position. You probably net short something over $1 billion on your gold contracts on COMEX. So that's your position. Now, you're in a bank. Your management, your treasury department, are probably getting rather worried about overall balance sheet leverage. So they will be knocking on your door in your department and saying, how's it going, Elijah? I mean, do you know any sign of closing those shorts? Well, the trouble is, Mr. Treasurer, that the price of gold keeps on going up and we can't catch it. Oh dear, oh dear, oh dear. You can see the dilemma that they've got themselves into. And this could actually, if this banking crisis, as I believe it will, accelerates, it could take out some bullion banks. And then there is no knowing what price on that basis gold will be. Don't assume it's one way, because the authorities, by that I mean Americans, Europeans, us Brits, will probably lean on the gold price as much as possible in order to keep it under control. And I think there was some evidence that might have been going on in the last few weeks. I can't say definitely, but I would not be surprised. So this is not necessarily just a one-way ticket. But I think what I would emphasize is that the reason to buy gold is not buying gold, it's just to get out of credit. So the price doesn't matter. You just got to get out of credit. Now, if that is correct, then the price could actually start moving very, very quickly as the banking system deteriorates. That, I think, is the immediate situation. Longer term, what we are looking at, I think, is the inflationary consequences on this credit of central banks trying, and their treasury departments, the government treasurers, trying to rescue the banking system, take on board all the losses that may be involved. And in the case of the dollar, absorb all that selling of foreigners. And foreigners, on the last count and on the US Treasury tick figures, they had over $7 billion in bank deposits. Sorry, $7 trillion. Let me get that right. The number of noughts are frightening. $7 trillion. And they have got a further $24 trillion invested in long-term securities, US treasuries, corporate bonds, and equities. So there's a potential tsunami of foreign selling about to hit the dollar. That's really actually what this banking crisis is likely to generate. So, my own personal view, my own personal strategy, if you like, in investment terms, is not to invest anymore, but just get the hell out of credit.
The one thing I did want to touch on more is the bullion banks going under. Can you expand on kind of what kind of new dynamics that would be in the precious metal markets? Because it seems like at least a lot of people speculate the precious metal markets are largely controlled by the bullion banks. So what kind of new dynamics would there be if those went under?
Well, you're right to say that the bullion market has been controlled by these banks, but there is likely to come a point where they lose that control. Now, whether it's this time or on the next banking cycle, only time will tell. But I think that the dynamics behind the situation have really escalated against bullion bank short positions very substantially. What we don't know, of course, is what their position on the London forward market is, because that's not really made clear.
Det som han snakker om her, det bullionbankene, det de som holder på å selge papirgull og papirsølv. Det de som holder på å manipulere prisen her. Så han mener de mister snart kontrollen på det, for de har shortet gullet så mye. Og når disse bullionbankene går over ende, så vil gullet og sølvet skyrocke antagelig. For det er alt er manipulert. Så det er jo det han forklarer for de som ikke har kunnskap om akkurat dette her med gull, for det er svært få i Norge som har egentlig.
My guess is that the large banks have probably covered themselves with some physical. But as to their net position, I would rather doubt that they are net long if you take into account their positions on the London bullion market. I mean, what we're talking about is a completely different market environment from the one in which these traders have grown up in. They've been dealing in the London forward market certainly since the 1980s, and they don't actually understand that it's the dollar going down, if you like, if you're pricing things in dollar, rather than gold going up. They just look at it as a sort of, if you like, a piece of paper in which priced in dollars. It's actually the wrong way, but anyway, they will discover that the hard way. And I think this, on this cycle, that's likely to happen. There is another aspect of this, Elijah, which we haven't mentioned so far, and that is, what action would Russia and China take to protect themselves from a collapse of the dollar? Well, I think the answer is quite simple. They can only do one thing, and that is reintroduce for themselves gold standards to secure the credit values in their own currencies. And that's a very important point. I think they realize this. There's a guy called Sergei Glaziev, who is one of the chief economic advisors to Putin and heads up a committee for the Eurasian Economic Union looking at devising a new trade currency. But he wrote an article in a Russian or a Moscow business paper, rather like the Moscow version of the Financial Times or the Wall Street Journal, if you like, called Vedomoski, on the 27th of December, which I could have written. I mean, he understood completely the role of gold in protecting the value of credit. Now, so far, I would say that China in particular, Russia less so, has been very, very reluctant to contribute anything to the upset of the global financial system. They do not want to be blamed for bringing the house down. I think this is clear. The Russians, I think, care less about that issue. So, but there is going to come a point where these two hegemons, China and Russia, are going to have to protect themselves. And it's not just them. They've already warned. I mean, Putin himself at the last International Financial Forum in St. Petersburg, attended by 81 official delegations and a number of other unofficial delegations from around the world, government delegations, told them quite clearly, he said, why hold reserves in Western currencies, the unfriendlies, as he calls us, currencies, when they can cut you off at the knees? Why hold them when they're only, at that time, I think the Fed funds rate was something like 2.75% to 3%, the rate of inflation was about 6.5%, according to the CPI. Why hold them when it's going down like that as well? I mean, you're on a loser. And why store your gold at these, in the vaults in these countries, in the unfriendliest countries, when they can just steal it off you? Remember Venezuela. What happened? We are meant to respect property rights. But we fell in line with American, I think CIA as much as anything, demands that we did not repatriate any gold to Venezuela. So we came up with a trumped up story about how the Venezuelan government wasn't legitimate, therefore we were not returning the gold. I mean, come on, it's not our gold. Our behavior in this has been really terrible. But it's given Putin, if you like, the excuse, the reasoning to tell 81 official delegations and a number of unofficial government delegations, look, these unfriendlies are not your friends. They are going to rob you. Get out of it. So he's already primed this. So I think that we're sitting in a situation where, as this banking crisis develops, there's going to be an avalanche of selling, potentially, coming from 81 smaller nations, if you like, most of which have got dollars in their reserves. I mean, not only dollars in their reserves, but they own US treasuries and so on and so forth. So this is not good. It really is not.
Now, Robert is wanting to know about this very issue with Russia developing possibly a new reserve currency with the BRICS nations. Robert asks, if the BRICS nations come up with a gold-backed currency, does that mean the rest of the fiat world needs to back the rest of their currencies with gold, or can two types of currencies coexist simultaneously?
I like it. Right, how am I going to answer this one? Well, one thing is clear from the mood music coming out of Moscow, and that is that they will go on a gold standard. Whether they do it properly or not remains to be seen. But they will do what they think is necessary to secure the value of ruble credit and tie it to legal money, which is only gold. So that's going to happen. For us to do that, we have got hurdles. First of all, how much gold have we actually got?
No, anything.
Actually, that's probably the last thing we should be considering. One of the main problems is that we have a central bank system which is driven by Keynesian economics. They even reject monetarism. Now, monetarism is insufficient as an explanation for for the relationship between money and credit. That is for sure. But so what we're talking about is a completely intellectual volte-face on monetary policy in the West. And the establishment, which is bound up by group thinking, I think is unable to handle this. So what it means is that things are going to deteriorate very, very substantially until, as a last resort, they will probably use currencies as a means of distributing gold. Now, what I mean by that is not necessarily saying, for $100,000, you can swap it for an ounce of gold. I don't think that quite. But what I can see is they will try and peg the currencies to gold so that effectively, the currencies become a money substitute rather than pure credit. That is the end game that they have to get to. But I am extremely pessimistic about the intellectual capacity of the system to understand this and adopt it. So I think things will go considerably worse than they otherwise would, because, if we actually understood what we were doing, we wouldn't get into this mess in the first place. It's as simple as that.
And we have a last viewer's question. I think this will have to be the last one here, from Cletus. Question for Alasdair. All currencies today are fiat and are failing. Has it ever happened before that all currencies failed at the same time? And what can we expect to happen to citizens and governments when this does occur?
The answer to his first question is that it has never happened before. And the reason for that is that before 1971, gold was included in the global monetary system. It was having less and less and less of a role. And, we've got to go back to 1933 when Americans were told, submit your gold coins, your bullion and your gold certificates to the government. That was the first real attack on the link between credit and gold. So, that's that I think, so this is the first time it's happened. But if, on the other hand, you look at, the hyperinflations, which actually I think is a misnomer, you really look at it not so much that prices are going up, but the purchasing power of credit's going down. Yeah, it's always been credit. That's happened. And if you look at the long-term price stability of gold, it's really been quite remarkable. Since 1950, the price of WTI oil, measured in gold, has fallen by roughly 17%. That's all. It's never more than doubled. There was an exception when the price went negative. If you remember back in, I think it was April 2020. But all this volatility actually is not on the gold side. It's coming from this ridiculous, speculation in futures, all in dollars. That's really where the volatility is. But if you really want to price things, don't price it in fiat currencies, price it in gold. That's really what this is telling us. What was the second part of his question?
What will happen to citizens and governments if all fiat currencies fail simultaneously?
Well, I'm not sure that it'll be exactly simultaneous, but I think it will mean that the power of China and Russia and Asia will increase very substantially relative to us. We will decline. And that raises concerns because we have an America with its allies, which are absolutely determined to get in the way of this growth in Asia. And I would worry that this could lead to an escalation of military conflict. And I think we're already potentially seeing that in the Gulf, in the Persian Gulf, because the Fifth Fleet has been sent there. There's, I think, the USS Florida, which is a nuclear attack submarine, has been sent there. There is concern that it may be sent into the Gulf through the Straits of Hormuz. There are concerns that now that peace has been restored to the whole region. Peace has been restored because the Americans have left. We're out of it. Now, this, I think, it is potential. If I've got that bit right, then potentially the Americans want to escalate tensions again. And there is an obvious bogeyman there, and that's Iran. And there is the obvious excuse that intelligence tells the Americans that they're progressing further with their nuclear ambitions than previously thought. Right, we'll send in a few missiles. We'll try and destroy the plants. Now, they do that. They won't have the support of Saudi Arabia anymore. Saudi Arabia will become your enemy. So this is a very delicate situation. And I just hope that the deep states, if I can call it that, the deep states' behavior is modified for these current circumstances. I see no sign of it so far. I really don't. And particularly the increase in tensions in the Pacific doesn't, to my mind, augur well for that aspect of the future, if you like. You're going to have one industry which is going to grow, and that's the defense industry. And, apart from anything else, we're all running out of ammunition over Ukraine. That horrid phrase, it's a meat grinder. But it seems to describe that awful situation. What we're doing with Ukraine between us and Russia, that is terrible. But having run out of ammunition, we've got to make more. We've got to make more missiles and all the rest of it. So that's probably the only growth industry that I can see in the short term. The rest of it ain't looking good.
Well, I think we all pray that this doesn't end up in further military conflict. I think one of the things that you said, if I could maybe just ask one last question here about that it's not like all currencies are going to maybe collapse simultaneously, but there's going to be this increase in power in the East and a decrease in power in the West. I know a lot of people have talked about how there might not be like hyperinflation or anything dramatic like that. It's just going to be continued high inflation, and the US and the West will just become less and less relevant. Do you see that as a possible scenario, or do you see a more dramatic event where we see like actual hyperinflation, 50% inflation per month, which is the definition of hyperinflation? Your perspective on kind of like the rate at which things will collapse?
Yeah, well, I don't like the description that we face inflation. What we face is a falling purchasing power of credit. And I think that I need to drum that into everybody's minds. Then it becomes more understandable. There will come a point when domestic Americans, domestic Brits, domestic Europeans realize that it's not prices going up, but the purchasing power of their currencies going down. And when they realize that, they're doomed. I mean, that's the end of it. We're probably quite a long way from that. I mean, I find it very, very hard to convince pretty intelligent people that, this sort of the whole of the inflation story is actually miscast. And it's a question of the purchasing power of credit being lost, going down. That's actually what it is. But I think people will realize that eventually. As to how rapidly it might happen, it could happen very quickly. I mean, when we had effectively paper currencies, looking at Germany in 1923, they reckon that final phase when people in Germany finally realized that it wasn't prices going up, it was their currency going down, so they just dumped the currency as rapidly as you can. As soon as you're paid your salary, get rid of it. That period was around about 6 or 7 months.
Det er jo det jeg holder på med nå dette året 2023, og få over mest mulig til råvarer og sølv og gull, holdt jeg på å si. Og det er jo der SR-Bank har sett foten ned, får ikke lov til det, og andre også personer som opplever det. For vi ser jo dette galskap, det som han forteller, det er enkelt å se hvis du bare har logisk tenkegang og har litt kunnskap selv, og litt historisk kunnskap, så ser du jo hva som holder på å skje nå. Han sier at den norske kroner, eller det er jo dollar, men norske kroner er gjort det enda mer, eller dollar. Han tenker jo i dollar, og norske kroner er gjort det med 90% nå på 12 år mot dollar, så det er jo enda verre i Norge. Og så det er jo derfor, og da når SR-Banken nekter dette, for så vil Sparebanken Vest også hadde nektet en kunde, og konvertere over i realverdier, det er da det viser denne globalisme agenda 2030 hva maktovergrepet blir utsatt for. Men folk som ikke har kunnskap, de forstår ikke dette her, og det er for sent. Så han sier, det er for sent når dere ser penger når dere sier verden noe. Nei, penger når dere sier verden noe lenger. Da kan dere ikke gjøre noe. Og sitte og vente og håpe og tro og stole og tro på julenissen, det nytter ikke. For når løpet er kjørt, så er løpet kjørt. Så det koster å ikke ha kunnskap i dag. Og stole på bedragere og løgnere, så det er nok av i Norge. Det er bare å se avisen her, det er bare Rolsted holder på med.
We can go back to John Law in 1720 France. The period then when his livre became completely worthless was a similar amount of time. And in France again, if we look at the time of the assignats, some 60 years later, 70 years later, the time of the French Revolution, that again was sort of, 6 months, something like that. But now we have, this is my bank. I can go tap, 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 tap and move money. So it could be a lot more quick. I don't know that it's going to be like that. I doubt it, because what you've got to get into people's heads is this bit about prices. It's not prices going up, it's the currency going down. And it's a very, very stubborn belief that is not the case. To dislodge that, I think you've got to see a period of decline in the purchasing power of the currency to the point where a wider public become convinced that is the case.
It is a language issue as well, because, even I'm using the word inflation, which really it's currency devaluation. Maybe we should start using that instead. Inflation seems like things are going up, but really it's just the currency going down here. Alasdair, we really appreciate your time today. Before we let you go, if our viewers are interested in learning more about...
Det er litt interessant. det at, nå snakker vi om dette, vi har jo snakket mye lenge om norske svakere kroner og alt det der greiene. Men det er jo problemet i dollar, i alle valuta, de vil miste kjøpekraft. Men nå er norske kroner våre holder på med dette i 12 år, og nå er det på dollaren skal ned, og euroen får sine problemer, altså alle i samme båt. Men ingen som klarer å se det store globale bildet, det skjer med alle. For dette fiat kredittsystemet, det er over. Og når du ikke forstår det, og det er derfor det er viktig å gå tilbake i historien, forstå historien. Du må jo gå tilbake 100 år, 200 år, forstå hvordan pengesystemet er. For det er jo noe så påfallende. Alle opptog av lønn, og de skal høyere lønn, de skal streike. Nå fikk lærerne 50 000 mer i lønnstillegg i går, og alle lønn. Egoismen er vi voldelige på. Men det er ingen som klarer å tenke det store bildet. For kommunen, for landet, hele systemet. Da driter de i det, for de er så egosentriske, at de bare tenker på seg selv. De klarer ikke tenke på det at her skal ha disse høye lønnstillegg, og så drar det ene eller andre med seg, til slutt så får vi kollaps. Det klarer de ikke tenke på, men de klarer tenke på seg at jeg skal ha mer lønn, jeg skal streike, jeg skal ditt, jeg skal datt, jeg. Egoisme. Men det er ingen som kan se det store bildet. Og de unge som skal inn i markedet skal ikke ha jobb en gang ennå. Så nå mister jobbene. Med denne her, og dette med AI og kunstig intelligens og alt det der greiene, alle utfordringene vi står overfor. Det tenker de ikke på. For de er så ut av i helsikken egoister alle. Måtte oppleve at dette er egoister. Så egentlig, så mye av det som de snakker om her, det er felt av mange nordmennene. De er grævla godt av, for nå skal de lære det på den harde og brutale og blodige måten. Det er det som skjer. For det går ikke an å snakke det for de er så hjernevaste og programmerte og materialistisk opptokne at de skjønner ikke sitt eget beste. Så det er nok den eneste måten, det er å få et skikkelig blodbad i økonomien, så vil bli veldig brutalt. For ellers lærer ikke folk. For egoismen, den er måttet innplante at alle skal være vinner, alle skal ditt, alle skal datt. Så det går ikke an å snu dette. Det er nok bare den harde, brutale måten det går til å snu denne utviklingen på, dessverre.